I'm Frank Garza. Welcome to Here and Abroad, a podcast that follows the U.S. men's national team and their player pool across Europe, MLS, or wherever else they play their club football. The MLS season kicks off this Saturday, February 22nd, and on today's show, we're going to preview the season for U.S. internationals who play in the league. And to help me do that, Kyle Bond from the Sporting News is back on the show. Kyle, welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, start of the MLS season coming soon. It's an interesting year in U.S. soccer, obviously with the USL announcement and full year two of Lionel Messi. A lot to sort of look forward to, but a lot to also see how it plays out. Right, like this is a pretty key moment in U.S. club soccer, so I'm intrigued to see how it plays out. I have some concerns, I have some excitements, but for the U.S. national team itself, it's also an interesting time for the domestic league.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing what those concerns and excitements are. This is a big episode. Even Kyle's cat has joined it. I mean, your cat's a big MLS fan, I'm sure. One thing I do want to mention before we get started is this is a special episode of Here and Abroad. This is the 100th episode of the show. The first episode launched back in February 2023, so we've been going for a full 2 years now. For today's show, Kyle and I are going to do just a normal formatted show, but for those who are interested in hearing about some of the top moments, most memorable moments from the show over the last 2 years, I'm going to stick around afterwards and talk us through some of those things. So if you're interested, please stick around after we finish so you can hear all about that. But let's keep it to MLS for now, Kyle. And the first thing I want to know is who's a player, a U.S. international in MLS who intrigues you, or someone that you're going to be keeping a really close eye on this season?
Yeah, so just to talk about that, I do want to bring up kind of the wider concern that not concern, actually, this is kind of a good thing, but in its own way, but just the part of MLS I find interesting when it comes to analyzing the U.S. national team as we enter 2025, and that is that there are fewer top-level U.S. internationals in MLS than ever before. And that is both good and bad. And the U.S. league is not the first league to be struggling with this, or not struggling, but sort of trying to balance this, right? Like, hey, we're not a top league in the world, like top 5 league in the world. So we want to export our best players to top 5 leagues in the world so that we have the best possible players. But then when we do that, we also want to be still competitive when it comes to producing U.S. internationals that are viable for the U.S. national team. The Mexican League has famously debated this for a long time and has sort of eaten itself alive trying to debate this. Whereas MLS has sort of accepted the need to export its best players, its best domestic players, to keep the U.S. pool at its best and therefore bring up the next crop of players. I think MLS has done a lot better of a job at this than Liga MX. In terms of Liga MX, it just is continuing to battle the unanswerable question of which is better. Do we keep all our best players here or do we send them abroad? And I think MLS has done a good job of answering it. However, the issue now is that there's less and less top-line players than ever in MLS. You see that in January camp, where the January camp roster was obscenely thin because there was nobody in the domestic league who was of national team ilk. So that is a long roundabout way of saying there aren't many to pick from when you ask me, who are you looking at, from a really, truly first team perspective. So I would say I'm really intrigued to see how, and this is a name who will come up more in this episode, I'm sure, Patrick Schulte gets on, because there are so many questions at goalkeeper. I think another name that you could throw out here is Tim Ream, because Tim, more by way of a lack of top-line players at the center back position than anything else, is still an option at center back. And I'm intrigued to see, he struggled for consistency since rejoining MLS. And I would like to see him get better. He was the second best center back on that Charlotte team. And I would say Andrew Privet is maybe, deserving of a look. And I'm actually really surprised that he didn't get one in January. So I think he's one, but I think Patrick Schulte is the guy that I'm looking at the most to say, hey, can you put yourself forward as a true contender to Matt Turner's spot? Because right now, Turner has managed to, even as he's struggling at the club level, put it together for the most part with the national team. So Schulte's going to have his work cut out for him. But if he can do that, I think not only could he maybe earn a move abroad, but also put himself in real contention to start for the U.S. national team.
Yeah, so center backs, goalkeepers, those are kind of where your players, were pulled from that you mentioned there. And that does seem to be one of the biggest opportunities for players in MLS when you look at who's been called into camps in the past. And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but center backs and goalkeepers are by far the position that gets called in the most. But I'm going to pick a striker for mine, and it's Brandon Vasquez. I'm a little bit partial because I live in Austin, so I'm an Austin FC fan, and I'm just going to be excited to see if he can get back to his top form. He was one of the best strikers, goal scorers in MLS when he was with Cincinnati. Went to Monterrey in Liga MX, seemed to get off to a really good start, and then maybe fade a little bit. Last season, Austin's invested in him big time. As the guy. And so I'm just curious to see, can he start racking up goals again, for this Austin FC team who struggled to score goals, in the past. I'm also interested to see him versus kind of Patrick Agimon, especially in these first couple of weeks, because I do think one of those two has a great chance of getting called into March camp because of all the injuries we have to center forwards, right now. And I really think it may be between those two, which one of them gets off to the best start. They're only going to have, I think, 2 or 3 weeks probably before a roster gets announced, but it'll see if one of those two guys can get off, to a really fast start.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just worry that from a long-term perspective, that position is relatively crowded, and a lot of guys are hurt right now, but you still have Josh Sargent coming back and firing. You've still got lots of guys who are in the mix, and so even if Vasquez and Ajimang do well, I just wonder, could they be depth pieces when there are injuries? And there are almost always injuries, yes, but I don't know about their long-term viability as like a real option. And that's kind of why I went for a goalkeeper and a center back, because those are the positions. And again, this speaks to where MLS stands as a producer of top-line U.S. national team talent, is that for me, the only way a lot of these guys are going to get in is at positions where there's room, because everything else is covered by players abroad. And so to me, it's those positions of weakness that really provide the opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more, because I do think these positional battles are one of the key storylines to follow in MLS. If you look at Pochettino's camp so far, and I'm going to take out January camp, okay, because that was specifically trying to bring in MLS players. He's really had 2 first team camps. There was the October friendlies and the November Nations League window. In the October camp, 4 MLS players were called in. Patrick Schulte, Zach Steffen, so 2 goalkeepers, and then Tim Ream, Miles Robinson, 2 center backs. November camp, those same 4 were called in, and then Brandon Vasquez was called in as well. So again, 2 goalkeepers, 2 center backs, and now 1 striker.
But Vasquez wasn't an MLS player at the time, I don't
Oh,
think.
that's true. That's true. Okay. So technically, it's just been 2 goalkeepers and 2 center backs. So good correction there. And so I guess that's not surprising at all because those do seem to be 2 areas of weakness for this U.S. men's national team. And let's talk about center backs first. Tim Ream, Miles Robinson are the guys that have been getting called in steadily. Is there another center back in MLS? Do you think that could possibly pass one of those 2 up?
Again, I think, to me, Privet was the guy that I would have said, but I'm confused why he wasn't called it. Like, January would have been the time if he was an option. And
tell me some more about Privet. I don't know too much about him.
So, 24-year-old plays for Charlotte FC. He's a Penn State guy, and he just had an unbelievable season last year. Charlotte FC's defense was incredible, and it was one of those that got better as the second half of the season went on. Like, they didn't start out like that, but they conceded 37 goals on the year, which was best in the Eastern Conference. Now, they scored 46, which also wasn't great. But you've got Ajamang up there, and he was doing well. But, Charlotte was performing before Tim Ream got there at a high level with their kind of reworked defense, and Privet was the guy who was really anchoring that back line. And he had a better year than Tim Ream. Like, he was the better center back than Ream was. And I really feel like he got underrated, over the course of the year. He didn't get the love that he deserved. And partly because of the center back tandem at Seattle that was so good. And they got really all the love for Defender of the Year, and Privet sort of didn't get included. And I'm really shocked that he didn't. I'm shocked that he didn't get a look in January, and I'm shocked that Jackson Reagan didn't get a look in January when he got a look last year and got injured, and like mid-camp. And that was kind of his chance gone. I'm really surprised that neither one of them got a look, because I think both of them would perform better than Tim Ream. I understand the need for veteran presence and whatever, experience, all that stuff. And yeah, it's just easier for a coach to go with what they know. But I really feel like both of those players could be useful. And I hope that Privet gets a little more attention, because it's really, really, really hard as a center back or a defender in general to get noticed, especially a center back. You really have to put performances together for a long period of time to get noticed. You're not doing things like scoring goals that people see right in front of them, right? Or even a midfielder or a fullback, whatever it is. Center back is like the hardest position to get noticed. And I think those 2 guys have done enough to get noticed, and they didn't in January. So I would be intrigued to see if they end up getting some attention as the year goes on.
Well, I'm glad you brought him up. I honestly don't know much about Privet at all, so I'll be keeping an eye on him. What about some of these there's some other guys that come to mind at center back. There's the veterans like Walker Zimmerman, Aaron Long, Matt Miazga. There's the younger guys, George Campbell, Jalen Neal. Any of those guys stand out to you as having the potential to have a breakthrough?
I think Jalen Neal, he's got the attention. He was called in until he got, dealt with injuries. He's dealt with injuries for the last 2 years. But he's a really good player, a really young player. He has room to grow. He's got to change his scenery now at the club level. And I'm intrigued to see how that goes on. I'm surprised that when he came back from injury at the Galaxy that he didn't get a spot. But I also get it. Like, they were firing on all cylinders, and there was really no reason to make a change. But I hope that he starts to get more opportunities because he's a really good player, and I think he would be somebody that could certainly be a positive addition for this team.
Okay, the other position then is goalkeeper. As we mentioned, Patrick Schulte, Zach Steffen are the two guys that have been getting called in. Is there a goalkeeper in MLS other than those two that you could see breaking into the first team or passing up, one of those two on the depth chart?
The easy answer is Drake Callender, but he's sort of fizzled as a hot commodity. I just don't think he's good enough with the ball at his feet, which is the reason why people have questioned Matt Turner. He's an exceptional shot stopper, but he doesn't provide an upgrade on any of those guys with the ball at his feet, and he does make the occasional glaring mistake. And I just don't see that. I see that being a problem for him breaking in long term. If he can improve with the ball at his feet, then I could definitely see him being an option. But that's tough for, he's 27, which, goalkeepers obviously take longer to develop and longer to age. But if you're 27 at any position, you're not really learning new tricks. So I don't know if I see that developing. Other than that, not really.
Yeah.
We'll have to see what happens, but I think a lot of the top goalkeepers in MLS right now are foreign, and we'll see how it plays out, but I'm not so sure I see anything likely happening outside of those two or those three.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that Calendar has going for him, I think, is that he plays for Inter Miami, and so there's always going to be the spotlight and a lot of eyes on him. So if he has some amazing saves, he has some really good games, that is going to get noticed, maybe more so than other players. The other guy,
also, Drake, I want to say this, he's a great guy. Spoken to him a number of times. Great guy, really professional. And I hope he gets a cap, at least, because he deserves it. I remember speaking to him last year. He got called into like 3 or 4 camps and didn't get a cap. And I asked him, I was like, how, is it frustrating to keep going back and get it, training and showing the coaches what you can do and not getting a look? And he sounded really frustrated by it. And I just hope that he gets to say, I wore the U.S. national team jersey on the field for an official cap, because no one would be able to take that from him. And I think he deserves to be able to say that. For what he's given to the team to not get a cap, I think would be harsh. And I think he deserves a chance to at least get out there and show what he can do. And I think he has some deficiencies. I don't think he's a real long-term option for this team. But again, I'll reverse what I said before. At 27 for a goalkeeper, you never know. There's a lot of time left. And I hope that he gets a look because he deserves it.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be nice to see. I mean, he's been getting called in, even in the Berhalter era. He was called in a few times. So he has been on the periphery of the team now for quite a while. I think the one other guy worth keeping an eye on is Matt Freese, who did get a call into the January camp. People were pretty excited about the year he had last season. Seems to be a guy who was under the radar. Can he keep impressing and maybe, fight his way in there? Well, let's talk about the other positions, okay? So obviously center back, goalkeeper, there's some opportunities for players. There has been opportunities for players. Midfield, outside backs, forwards, is there anybody you see in those positions who has a realistic chance of breaking into the first team, sometime during this MLS season?
Yeah, and I won't present a new name, but somebody that I think needs to have a good season to make his way back in is a guy, Jesus Ferreira. He's got to change his scenery that we haven't mentioned yet, going to Seattle Sounders. And I think he has a lot to prove, that he's sort of been bypassed on a number of fronts at the striker position on the depth chart. And I just think he needs a big season at a new club to move himself back into contention to get some looks. I think he would be the number one guy that I would think about outside of goalkeeper and center back to have a big performance. And I hope we get it because he's a fun player. And I don't know if he's better than a lot of the guys who are playing abroad, but he can serve a role. He can do a job. He can come in when guys are injured, and I think it would be fun to see him back in the mix.
Yeah, he has the experience of playing in the biggest type of game you could play in, World Cup knockout round against the Netherlands. He just had an awful season, and just really, really has fallen off the radar and just really, really fallen down the depth chart. But, he's going to be playing for a good team now, Seattle, who's going to be scoring a lot of goals. If he can start scoring a lot of goals, that's going to put him back on the radar. And I'd like to see him. I'd like to see him do it too, because he seems like a good guy that has taken a lot of heat from USMNT fans. I'd like to see him have a good season, and get another run at it.
And there's two other guys I also think deserve mention that both got a look in January camp that I think can take another step this year. They're both in midfield, which is a very deep position for the U.S. national team. But if they can continue developing, they can be options both as backups in the short term and maybe starters in the long term. Would be Jack McGlynn and Benjamin Kremasky. Kremasky needs to keep developing. He's still young. He has a long way to go. But I think the building blocks are there with Kremasky, and I really think if he takes another step this year with Inter Miami and gets more starts in that midfield, it's a thin roster. He could get a lot of time. I think he could be an option. And then McGlynn, making the move to Houston, is it? I think.
Yes.
I think he's another guy that really projects as a good talent, but has a ways to go to get there. Consistency being the next thing for him. But man, he takes a good set piece and does a lot of good things well, and a lot of good things that this team is missing. So I think McGlynn is a guy that if he can have a good season, I could see him getting a move abroad. I think he could play in the championship right now. And even if he doesn't, if he sticks around with Houston for a while longer, I think he could be a domestic option to really stamp himself as a rotational piece in this roster. Because I feel like behind the big guns in midfield, the U.S. national team has sort of sputtered trying to find consistent backup options. You've got Luca De La Torre, but he struggled with injury and really had a tough year this last year. And otherwise have just not been able to get guys consistently in those positions. And if he can be a consistent option, then I think that benefits the national team greatly to have somebody who knows the system well, that can come in and play a role repeatedly when the top level guys aren't available for whatever reason.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned De La Torre, because he's going to be another interesting one to watch. Somebody who was solidly in the national team for the last 2-3 years, really has fallen out. Can he get going again with San Diego? And then one more guy I think we need to mention is Diego Luna. We haven't talked about him. He's a fan favorite. He's fun to watch. He's kind of has this kind of heroic moment now in January camp where he got the broken nose, came back on the field, had the assist, and then had the coach, talking about, how great he was in his own words. So I think he's going to be a fun one to watch too, and to see if he can take that next step. Any other storylines you're really fascinated by or interested to kind of see how they play out regarding U.S. internationals in MLS this season?
Good question. I just hope that the fan base supports a lot of these guys, because I don't think their importance to the pool has dipped, even if their visibility in the pool has dipped. I think these are important players who make up not the backbone of the roster, but they fill in all the spaces. And those players are important. I was talking about with Jack McGlynn, like how he can be a consistent backup option. If you just have a rotating or revolving door of backups that change every single camp, it makes it hard for the first choice guys because they feel like there's a lot of pressure on them staying fit and staying on the field and keeping their levels up. And obviously you want that, but you want that because someone is pushing for their spot, not because there's nobody behind them. And if that pressure is there because there's nobody behind them, that's where you get guys playing nervous, and you get what we saw at the end of the Berhalter era, where players talk about how training sessions were, guys are dogging it in training sessions, and guys are lackadaisical because not only do they feel no pressure for their jobs, but they also feel pressure that if they aren't available, then the levels are going to drop considerably to the point where it hurts them to not be on the field personally, because now the team doesn't achieve things without them, and now they don't get to play in bigger games, or the team gets knocked out of the Copa America or whatever it might be. So you need these guys performing at a high level, and you want them consistently in the team. And so I hope the fan base realizes the importance of these players for some of them to stake a claim and say, even if I don't earn this spot, I'm going to push for it, and I'm going to make a hard push, because that benefits the player pool and the national team through a trickle-down effect. And that's important.
Yeah. And Pochettino has, a number of times come out and talked about how important this group of players is in MLS, and that they have just as big of an opportunity as those players who are playing in Europe. And that's the storyline I'm really interested to see how it plays out. Is that lip service, or is that the real thing? Does Pochettino start bringing in more players to camp? Because like we just mentioned, there's only 4 MLS players that have been brought in so far, and those are more or less the same 4 that were brought in the Berhalter era. So he hasn't really made any change in like the number or which MLS players are coming into the team. And so does he bring more in to the team this year who are performing well, or is it just that he wants those players to have hope so they can develop better, or is it all talk? I mean, that's the storyline I'm curious to see, is does he actually make a change there? And I think this March camp is going to be a perfect opportunity to show that, because of just how many injuries there are throughout the squad, that you could see more MLS players than normal, being called in. Well, Kyle, I will make sure and put links in the show notes to your X account, which is @the_bonfire, and also to your work at the Sporting News. Thanks again so much for coming back on the show today.
Thank you, Frank. It's going strong. We're pushing towards another full calendar year, and should be fun. I think I'm just booking my travel soon for some of the summer tournaments, so I'm getting excited.
That is exciting. I'm looking forward to the Gold Cup this summer. Maybe you're talking about the Club World Cup as well here in the U.S. Well, thanks, Kyle. And for those of you who are interested in hearing more about some of the top moments and highlights from Here and Abroad's first 100 episodes, please stick around for that. All right, so 100 episodes. I just wanted to take a few moments to celebrate that a little bit and just review what some of the, my best memories are, what some of the top moments are of the podcast, so far of these last 2 years. And I'll start with what was the very first episode of Here and Abroad. Well, the very first episode was published on February 2nd, 2023. And the title of the episode was Who is Anthony Hudson? Part 1, Head Coach of New Zealand. And I interviewed Michael Burgess, who's a sports writer for the New Zealand Herald. So yes, very first episode of Here and Abroad, I interviewed a New Zealand journalist, which might sound kind of weird, but February 2023, if you remember, this is coming off of the World Cup in 2022, just a few months after that. The whole Berhalter-Reina drama had just kicked off big time. Anthony Hudson was named interim head coach at the time, and I didn't know a whole lot about him. And I knew that he had been the national team coach of New Zealand. I knew he had coached the Colorado Rapids. And so the first couple episodes of Here and Abroad were doing episodes with journalists to try and learn more about Hudson. And so the first episode, I sat down with Michael Burgess. He talked to me about what his time was like as New Zealand head coach. And then in episode 2, I spoke with a journalist who covers the Colorado Rapids to talk about his head coaching time there. But they're both interesting episodes that I think still are, even though they're 2 years old, they'd still be worth a listen to, because Michael Burgess especially shares some really good stories about Hudson and his development as a coach. Okay, what is the most listened to episode ever? The most listened to episode ever was episode 80 from September 2024. It was titled Checking In on the Americans at PSV, and my guest was Rick Elfrink. Rick is a journalist who covers PSV for Eindhoven's Dagblad and 80 Sport World, and he's one of the most well-known PSV journalists, in the world. I forget how many followers he has on X, but it's a huge, huge number. And so with all the Americans at PSV, it was awesome to just talk to him and get the inside scoop about Pepe and Tillman, and we talked about even Ledesma at the time, and Serginho Dest and his injury and all of that. And so a lot of people really enjoyed that episode. It's the most listened to episode so far. And then the final thing I want to share is what is the most watched episode. Okay, so the first year of the podcast, it was audio only. In year 2, I started posting the videos to YouTube. And so the most watched video on YouTube was episode 44 back in February 2024. Learn more about Esmir Bayraktarovic, the 18-year-old who recently made his debut for the USMNT. And my guest was Seth from the Blazing Musket. So this episode was done after not this most recent January camp, but the previous one, where Esmir Bayraktarovic came in and nutmegged a guy and just looked like the most exciting player on the field, towards the end of the game. And so I wanted to learn more about him. Interesting. He's since switched his. He switched. He no longer plays he no longer represents U.S. men's national team. He switched to playing for Bosnia and Herzegovina in the last year or so. So he's no longer in our player pool, but at the time he was one of these really young, exciting players that we thought maybe was going to have a future with the U.S. men's national team. And that I don't know why that episode is the most watched. To be honest, it was a super interesting episode. Seth was great, but that episode just continues to build steady views over time. People are still watching it to this day, even though it's a year old. And so for some reason, that episode has kind of stayed the test of time and just keeps building views, one at a time over these months. So there you go. That's it for today. Thanks to everyone who has listened to and supported Here and Abroad over these first 100 episodes. I really, really appreciate it. As always, it's a huge help when you hit that subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube, or that follow button if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or somewhere else. Thank you so much. I'm Frank Garza. You can follow me on X at FrankGarza007, and I'll be back next week with a new episode.